So it's my pleasure. We have three distinguished speakers, and perhaps even more interesting is not only do they have an important position in the field of higher education, but they all come from very different fields in the academic world, and I think it's important. We'll probably get different views given that. So our first speaker is Professor Janice Stein. She has a very long list of things I could read to you about, but there's a few things in any case I'd like to mention. She's the Belzberg Professor of Conflict Management and Negotiation at the University of Toronto. She's a founding director of its Munk School of Global Affairs. She's written, considerable books and articles. She's considered a leading scholar in the field of political psychology and international politics. She's a member of the Royal Society of Canada, the Order of Canada, and that of Ontario. Honorary foreign member of the American Academy of Arts and Science, and perhaps most importantly, she holds a number of honorary doctorates, including of the Hebrew University. Please, Professor Stein.
Thank you very, very much. As I've had the occasion to tell Menahem before, the honorary degree from the Hebrew University is the best single degree I've ever gotten in my career. So I now consider myself a graduate of this university. When we were talking about the conference with Shaul and with Nachman, we settled on the session of the theme of challenges to higher education. And I think this is really one of these interesting moments in history, an inflection point where, in fact, there are forces driving for change in what is an extraordinarily conservative sector of society. I can say this as a lifelong academic. We have an extraordinary capacity inside the universities, the faculty particularly, to resist change. We know that we outlast all the presidents and all the rectors. And so we dig our feet into the concrete with just extraordinary skill. But the argument I want to make today really is that we are at a moment, I think, of change. And there are three intersecting forces that are driving it. The first, and I'll talk about each very briefly, but the third, spend a little more time. The first is the globalization of education. The second are the economics of higher education, which are increasingly unforgiving. And the third is the digitization of knowledge, which is something we are all living with in different ways. And it is the coming together of these three factors, which is challenging the way the university has organized itself in society. That's the fundamental thrust of the argument. Let me go back now and talk just briefly about the first two, but I hope both Menahem and Rivka will have more to say about those. And then we'll a little more time on the digitization of knowledge and what those challenges mean for the university. The first is the globalization of higher education. The global investments in higher education are really stunning. I know that you just came back from a trip to China, and you saw those investments. They are really, really striking. The amount of money that the government of China alone is investing in higher education. They are currently graduating approximately 10 times as many doctorates in computer science as the United States is. And at some point, quantity generates quality. We don't know exactly when that point is, but the massive nature of the investment is really stunning. So that's on the expansion of education globally. We're also seeing an inability of the very best students in India and China to get into their very best universities. If you look at what's happening in India, it is more difficult for a really excellent student in India to get into one of their IITs than it is for a very excellent student in the United States to get into Harvard. And there are over between 500,000 students every year who are the very, very best in India who are excluded from their own system of higher education. So at the same time as we have these massive investments, we really do have, in a serious way, a global competition for the very best students, and that's changing the dynamics of university. It's certainly changing my university in Canada. We are very much focused now on students worldwide, not only students in Canada. We have a global competition for the very best faculty, and that is really a significant change over the last 20 years. Let me come to the second issue, which I think is very familiar in Israel, as well as in Canada, which are the changing economics of higher education. I've heard it rumored that there is a deficit at the Hebrew University. I can tell colleagues here that we have lived with the deficit at the University of Toronto on and off for the last 20 years. I can barely remember a year when there isn't a deficit of one sort or another. And most of our planning, in fact, is about how do we manage the deficit. This is badly exacerbated in the developed world, and in some sense Israel was an exception, but will not likely be as longer in the same way, by the global economic crisis, which forced austerity budgets on many, many governments. And when we look particularly at the great public research universities, which the Hebrew University is one, which the University of Toronto is one, the capacity of governments to fund universities at their historic rate, and not only to fund at their historic rate, but to fund at a level which enables us to compete globally with funding that is going on in other parts of the world that, as Yair said last night, are not experiencing this decline in public revenues and decline in growth, is frankly diminished. And it's not diminished for 1 year or for 2 years or for 3 years, it's diminished. Most of us can't think longer than a decade out when we look at public finance, but it is certainly diminished. And that is therefore changing the calculus of all the university leaders. Student tuition becomes a much more significant part of university revenues in public research universities, and that is a global trend. But what do we know about students? And so here's where the pincer movement comes. Again, in the developed world, demographics are changing. We have an aging population. So when we look at the great bulge of baby boomers that drove public policy all through the developed world, that is coming to an end. Secondly, universities have not really thought through in a very serious way the kinds of education that is necessary to provide. And Israel, in some sense, has done more here because students in Israel all work to a far higher degree than in many other developed societies. But generically, the point is still true. Universities have yet to adapt to an aging student population, which forms an increasing part of their revenue. Thirdly, tuition costs, and this is true in North America particularly, and especially in the United States, where still to this day, 17 of the top 20 great universities, research universities, are located. In the United States, tuition costs have risen by 200% if you compare it to the cost of inflation. And it has fundamentally hit what many people consider a ceiling. The universities cannot simply continue to raise tuition at the rates at which they've raised tuition. And as one president said recently to me, it's interesting because so many families in the United States finance these growing costs with the value of their homes. Well, that ain't the future for the funding of higher education. So universities are feeling financial pressures that are multiple And that is forcing at almost every great research university I know some reconsideration of the student population, some reconsideration of what they teach, and some reconsideration of how they teach. Finally, we see much greater government regulation. There's almost a paradox here. As governments have withdrawn, have reduced the proportion of the funding that they provide, and let me again give you an example from our university, which I know well. 25 years ago, the government provided 80% of the operating budget of the University of Toronto. It's now 45 and dropping. So that's a significant change within a short period of time. And as they've withdrawn from the field, they've actually increased the regulatory oversight. So we have now all kinds of outcome measures, performance measures, very much like the Department of Foreign Affairs, Paul, in Canada. And it's almost as if regulation becomes a substitute for funding, but actually diverts significant amount of academic talent and time into a regulatory agenda. I suspect some of that is true in Israel as well. Put all those together, you have a system of higher education, especially at the top, that finds itself under challenge. Let me come now to the third area, which is external to the universities, which is the digitization of knowledge, which I want to argue is fundamentally changing how knowledge is created, how it's produced, and how it's shared. And the research and scholarly community cannot really remain immune from these processes. Many of my colleagues believe that we can, and then I turn around and I say, look at the publishing industry. There were no ebooks 10 years ago. Ebooks are now, in fact, the majority of books that are published. The music industry, which has fundamentally changed in the way it operates, film, virtually everything has been transformed by the digitization of knowledge. And so it seems very unlikely to me that universities and scholarly research can remain immune from the same kinds of changes. Briefly, if we look back, and I want to make clear that this is not an argument of technological determinism, a vulgar technological determinist argument, because technology interacts with institutions and societies to have an impact. But if you look back at university models, if we start from the great universities, of the past, Bologna, Oxford, we originally started with a one-to-one model with a scholar in a tutorial relationship with a student. In the industrial age, we moved from a one-to-many, which is the faculty member in front of a large number of students. And that's fundamentally still the model we have in most cases. But the digital world has moved into a many-to-many world, which is so different, which creates both huge opportunities but really significant challenges. And the most important challenge, and let me make this point early on, is that in a many-to-many world of knowledge transmission, knowledge creation, authoritative knowledge becomes far more important than it is in the one-to-many. How we, in fact, establish criteria for quality, for expertise, for authority, becomes ever more important when the sources of knowledge are streaming in a many-to-many world. And that is both the unique challenge of the university, but it is also, I think, the unique opportunity. So if we have these two stylized portraits then of the world in which the university is operating, the analog world and the digital world. The analog world is the one-to-many. For all my colleagues who are still teaching 500 students in a classroom, which I still am, I'm fundamentally still in the analog world. And in an interesting book written by Chris Anderson, The Long Tail, that's, in a sense, largely a common cultural world, the largely standardized model. In the digital world, which is where we are all moving increasingly, that is the many-to-many world, and that's a noisy, fractious world in which authoritative knowledge is both more difficult to establish and more important. Where are universities today in this structure? In between, uneasily positioned between these two words, with a foot in the analog world and a foot in the digital world. And actually a wonderful quote from David Sheshbal, who says, in a post-industrial economy, faculty members continue to work as artisans. That is so true. If you've ever tried to move a committee at one of our large institutions, the sense that individual faculty members have of their own independence and autonomy is truly striking. We know how, in fact, we bring with us still a sense of individual competence and artisanal sensibility to these challenges. So, two ways of thinking then about the future. And I want to pose the challenges and then listen to Menahem and Rivka answer the question. But there's two ways of thinking about these challenges, it seems to me. How much time?
You still have time.
Okay.
We have another good 7 minutes.
Okay. The first challenge is what I call this deep contradiction that's growing between the private and the public. Fundamentally, universities are being privatized, even the great public universities. And they're being privatized because tuition revenue is becoming more and more important as a source of funding, and universities are reaching out to bring in more students in order to solve fiscal problems. That is a process of privatization. At the same time as we are seeing an era in which knowledge is more public, knowledge is more open, knowledge is available on open platforms. How universities navigate this path between privatization, on the one hand, of revenues, and a public forms of knowledge which are available increasingly not behind paywalls. That is, I think, one of the challenges. Second way of thinking about these futures, and if you're a sociologist, this kind of thinking is familiar, institutions exert powerful pulls of inertia. So how do universities respond to these challenges? And there are two ways, really, of doing it. One is to argue, and many of my colleagues argue this, and the literature really argues this, that these new digital forms will simply be absorbed into existing institutions. There are powerful forces of institutional assimilation. This is not the first, and certainly that's correct, new form of technology to come along. Universities adapt, adjust at the margins, but fundamentally, the forces of assimilation are so powerful that universities 25 or 30 years from now will look more or less like they look now, with some changes in the way we manage knowledge. That's the conservative one, and a lot of faculty who I call the experts at resistance will argue that, will make that argument very, very strongly, frankly. I hear them all the time. Second argument says, no. Folks, wake up and smell the coffee. This time it's, and not to use a very abused title, Rogoff's book, This Time It's Different, which is the economic study that's come under severe attack because of its methodology on past economic crises. So let me say, this time something's different, right? And we've already seen it in research patterns by colleagues, and where digital platforms are providing radically new opportunities for faculty to share knowledge very quickly. And that's true in science, it's true in the humanities. And in some senses, I think colleagues in humanities are doing some of the most interesting work in digital space, really. They're collaborative, they are sharing, there's peer-to-peer criticism. A lot of work gets done long before the peer review process and the peer publication process. Journals are effectively moving online. It's not clear that journals survive in the way that we have known them in the past. If that's true, the criteria for academic merit and promotion will change if that peer referee process changes along with digital technology. But what we certainly know is that, that our research patterns are changing. And that is very strongly true of the best faculty at the really great research universities. So we're actually seeing something happen. Teaching is changing less, and it's interesting. And we could have spent the whole session on MOOCs, which I really don't want to do, other than to say that we, like other universities, are participating in the MOOC world. This is a really early entry into a global digitized university world. It will not last in its present form. It is extremely expensive to do. People who see it as a solution to the financial challenges of universities are not correct. But what we are certainly doing at our university is the investment in MOOCs is a way actually to think more creatively about what we call the inverted classroom or the blended classroom. That the change that we're likely to see is not so much in this universe of 1 million students of whom 99% do not complete the course, but it's rather inside our own universities where we will start to use digital material in very different ways and change the roles of university teaching to make the best use of this methodology. It's also true, and this is something that we're only beginning to discuss in universities, that we may see changing balances between tenured research faculty on the one hand and teaching faculty who work in the digital universe in very different ways with very different responsibilities. That has, by the way, the potential to create enormous conflicts, I think. Where do I think we will come down? And I'm anxious to hear from my two colleagues. I think it is not all or nothing. The challenge truly is to preserve the university as a community of learners, because that's what universities are more than anything else. But my suspicion is that this time we will actually move to some degree to change the patterns of teaching and learning and research. And that is largely because it is not only the technology is changing, the economics of higher education are unforgiving at this moment and likely to be unforgiving for the next decade. The great research universities, of which this is one, live in what I call a spiky world. Some governments in some countries have gotten much more quickly than others how important these universities are to their society and to their future and have invested in them. Others are unwilling to differentiate because of the politics. And frankly, in Canada, they have not differentiated. And I think that is a strategic mistake. No country can survive today without differentiating among its universities and investing in its very best research universities. To the extent they don't, the processes I've described will deepen and will force universities, and fundamentally, and this is the issue, force faculty members into processes of change, some of which will provide just enormous opportunities through digitization and sharing and research opportunities and new kinds of knowledge, but some which will be disruptive of community and of faculty and of excellence. So where we come down and how we navigate this path will matter not only to universities, but to our societies. Thank you.
Talking about how conservative the academic world is, our next speaker is Professor Rivka Carmi, and she is the first woman president of an Israeli university, of Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. Professor Carmi is a graduate of the Hadassah Medical School of the Hebrew University School. She completed residency in pediatrics, and she has a fellowship in neonatology at the Soroka University Medical Center. She did a 2-year fellowship in medical genetics at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard University. She served as director of the Genetic Institute and the Soroka University Medical Center. She also served as the chairperson of the Israeli Association of Medical Genes. She has over 100 publications in medical genetics. Her research included the identification of 12 new genes and 3 new syndromes, of which one is known, the Carmi syndrome. In addition to her duties as president, Professor Carmi remains a member and serves as a consultant of national and professional and public committees and organizations. She is, in fact, the predecessor of our following speaker as the first woman to serve as the chairperson of the Committee University Heads in Israel. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine, for this very generous introduction. I may have missed something, but I am a graduate of Hadassah Medical School, which is in this university, the Hebrew U, and it's always wonderful to come back to my alma mater. Not only because of Menahem, but actually because of this wonderful institution. Well, and thank you, Janice, as well, for your really very enlightening presentation, of which I have decided to take upon the challenge of the fact that governmental funding for higher education in general is shrinking, has shrunk, is shrinking, is going to shrink in the near future and even farther. And this is not a local phenomenon, not only in Canada and Israel, it is worldwide. And in fact, here in Israel, we are in a way just recovering from more than 10 years of huge burdens put on the higher education by extreme cuts. And when I'm saying we are recovering, it is being in a way, in a very gentle way, because I'm not sure that with the new budget, with new budget cuts that we are experiencing right now, this is going to be something stable, and I'm afraid that this funding shortage is going to be with us for quite a while. Just one note, which is might be different in the North America in general, and maybe in Canada as well. You may know that in Israel, tuition is something fixed. It is determined by the government, and it hasn't changed for the past 15 years or so, even longer. It was negotiated with the students for a while, but failed altogether. We had a very active demonstration against it some years ago, and the government has decided to put this aside. So a very important resource of finance, of funding, has actually, for the meanwhile, has lost to the higher education. What university did in the past 10 years in order to overcome those extreme cuts, in order to be able not only to remain alive, but also to develop in some ways, was the very the most understandable step, which is freezing hiring. Now, you may be aware of the fact that in Israel, Israel University has been funded by the government for about 68 to 75% of their operating budget. Depends on the university, depends how old the university is. So I would say between 70 and 70% of their operating budget. The rest is coming from tuition and some other resources, very limited resources. By the way, only a very small fraction of the donations to the universities goes, understandably, to the operating budget. However, the expense of universities is largely, as in any other organization, go to salaries. And universities, the tenure-track salaries, about, I would say, 75% of the budget. But all others, meaning external teachers, meaning graduate students that teach in the university, and they are a very major force in higher education as teachers, they amount down to another 15%. So close to 90% of the operating budget actually goes to salaries, to subsidized salaries. So every new negotiation with the unions actually brings about another addition to the operating budget. And the bottom line is that the operating budget does not at all provide for any kind of development in universities. So, if there is a need for renovations, some universities are old enough to really necessitate very extensive renovations. If it comes to new building, if it comes to new equipment, if it comes to hiring new researchers in fields that demand very high input in terms of finance in order to provide for their research needs, all of this cannot come from the operating budget. Now, when you are in trouble and you have to cut, the first thing to do is not to hire new faculties. In Israel, there is tenure track, everybody is unionized, is organized. You can hardly fire people. So the name of the game is not to recruit people in those slots that become vacant due to retirement. And this is what happened during the past decade, or about 15 years. Israeli universities lost what we call the brain drain, lost almost half a generation of young researchers that could have been recruited to universities were there not a need to actually freeze hiring. And you may have heard or not about this phenomenon of brain drain, which we actually started to deal with about 2 or 3 years ago with the idea to bring those wonderful Israelis that can find places all over the best universities in North America and in Europe as well, to bring them back home. The other thing is that, when you don't have enough money to operate your business, then you have to lower your expenses by what is, at the end of the day, lowering the level of service you give to your students, of teaching labs, spectrum of courses that you provide, etc. So it means definitely damaging in a very significant way the quality of teaching in universities. And that was, for the past 10 or 15 years, something which the higher education in Israel endured in a very, I would say, difficult and harsh way. About 3 years ago, the government of Israel decided to make some kind of repair to this situation, which is, I'm not going to dwell about that, which is doing a lot of good, I would say, but certainly not enough. We may, at the end of the day, come back to the years before the lost decade. This is how we call this last 10 years. But this will not enable us at all to really flourish and resume our leading position in the world, in science in general, definitely in high tech and biotech. So the question is actually, what can university do in this kind of a situation? As I said before, you can cut, you can try about various other resources. Foreign students, this is something which you can do. It is not, even in the best places in terms of how much they are able to recruit foreign students, we cannot compete with other universities worldwide. And this is not a real source of income to universities. It is good. We have to do it. It is part of globalization as well. It connects us to the world, but this is not a significant income. Of course, you go for what we call external programs to offer the general public or to offer specific groups in the public well-paid kind of program. It has very significant ramifications. I'm not going to go into it. But again, this is not something really significant that can provide universities with a source, a robust source that you can rely on, and it is sustainable. Obviously, we rely a lot on donations. I don't have to tell you what is the situation worldwide with donations, even though it is becoming a little bit better after the financial crisis for about 4 years ago. Everybody is competing with everybody, sometimes for the same resources of money. And again, this is something that you have to have, but it is not something you can rely on in a sustainable way. So here I would like to propose, I would say, an additional kind of strategy, how to generate additional sources of income to the universities, actually by teaming up with and mobilizing governments and states to work with universities. I think in Israel we have quite a few examples for this kind of relationship between higher education and academia. Obviously, the more clear examples that I have are from my university, which lies in the periphery of Israel. It is in the south, in the Negev of Israel. And I think this kind of approach will also serve another issue, which is extremely, I think, important nowadays. It is to address the idea that people really want to see what is the relevance of higher education. So that the perception of higher education nowadays is not what used to be, you know. This is a kind of an ivory tower. They are producing the knowledge. They are the ones to disseminate knowledge locally and internationally, and they have their academic freedom, and they can do whatever they want. The public today wants to see, first of all, what is the relevance, and secondly, what is coming out in terms of, you know, like we are investing in terms of our taxes, etc. We want to see what's there for us, what we can gain out of universities or the higher education system in general. This kind of approach actually put forward, I think, the notion, and the real one, that first of all, universities are a real engine of growth. It is not just a way of just a term of speech. They have done, and they can be great mobilizers of growth, of development, and they should be perceived and used as such. And then also universities are robust agents of change. They have this huge platform of highly professional, very highly educated faculty on one side, on the other, the young generation. And they are all, in fact, literally under our hands. And unfortunately, we don't, quote unquote, use them much. And especially in Israel. Our youngsters come to the university at the age of 23, 22, 23. They've graduated from the army service. Some of them are highly professional coming out of the service, not to mention master leadership skills. They go for their traditional journey to South America or to the Far East, go back. They come around the age of 22, 23. They are adults. They know what they want. And many of them, being Israelis, serving in the army, have those still have those values and commitments and are very eager to be involved. So university as an engine of growth, and on the other hand, an agent for change that can use the wonderful human beings that they control. And every year they get younger, no matter what, we are staying there, but they get younger and younger, and I'll tell you, much more capable than us. So one example for that is teaming up, collaborating, and mobilizing industry. Industry in general, whether it would be high-tech or biotech or any other kind of industry. Most of the industries nowadays, from economical considerations, had abandoned, to a large extent, their R&D, research and development, be it the pharma companies or other large organizations. And on the other hand, universities are all about R&D. They are about research, and gradually they are going into the more applied kind of research. They want to see what's there at the end of their research project. There are lots of examples here in Israel. Some of them are institutionalized. Some of them are actually coming from the government. The magnet project, which has been now exported worldwide, where the university comes together with the industry and the university and actually mobilizes all those knowledge that comes out of the research in the university. I can tell you that our university is a partner in the tripartite kind of project in Eilat Eilot, which is going to become the beta site for alternative energy research in Israel. This is the platform that we are now providing to companies from all over the world that need the environment to test their own technologies. So we are invested in that venture, which is private, public, and academic and university. This is one example. There are other examples like that. Obviously, there are priorities to the government, like any other government. In Israel, in particular, it is water, it is energy, solar or alternative energy. It is coming. The gas industry is coming up, and others, and they are all can be matched with very important, very strong, very significant research on universities, and they should come together. Universities can be involved very much in regional development. And again, I'm bringing the example of Ben-Gurion University. Ben-Gurion University was actually founded with a governmental mandate 43 years ago to spearhead the development of the Negev. The idea was to develop this 2/3 of Israel landmass, which is an arid zone, and provide Israel a place to expand. Actually, this is the only place that Israel can expand to. In a way, throughout the years, the government has totally abandoned this kind of mandate because the university has become a regular university that's being budgeted like any other universities in a very nice model, though nothing was actually catered for this mandate. But somehow the university maintained this cultural kind of commitment to develop the Negev, and the university is involved in numerous projects in the city. And I always take Ben-Gurion University 50 kilometers to the north. There is no city of Beersheba. There is no, all those kind of wonderful development. And the IDF would not even consider going down there if not for a robust university. So the university can actually operate and can bring into fruition ideas and needs and plans of the government. The government of Israel has decided that it wants to enhance relationship with China and India. The first thing that they did after going to those places and to realize that what they really want is relationship with academia, with universities, because they very well appreciate what is the potential there. So the first thing that they did after coming for those trips was to come to Professor Trajtenberg and say, we want to establish a joint scholarships with Israeli universities to bring Chinese and Indian doctorates and postdoctorates. So the academia can actually execute all kinds of needs and ideas that the state needs in order in its PR or whatever kind of necessities. And the last thing I want to talk about, a minute. Do I still have a minute?
Have 1 minute.
1 minute, exactly. This is what I need. It is to promote education, and especially education of minorities and indigenous populations. Again, this is, I would say, one of the major goals of Israel, of the state of Israel right now. We're talking about Arabs, we're talking about Orthodox Jews, and there is nothing better than delegating this kind of responsibility or work to universities. And they are doing it, albeit in a very, I would say, moderate, modest, and not, I would say, very effective way. But we have examples from the past, the way universities are being involved with all projects of accessibility to higher education of those very low communities, very low socioeconomic communities. Again, if I can bring an example from my university, is dealing with the Bedouin population of the Negev, the indigenous native population of the desert, about 200,000 people, where we have a whole spectrum of programs in high schools, in first year, recruiting, maintaining all kinds of programs in order to make them able to come into the higher education system. The same goes for relationship between universities and colleges and how to see the whole system, the whole education system where universities are leading. And in the 20 seconds that will remain, this is all very nice on the national level, on the higher education system level. But to my humble opinion, this is something which is extremely important for the individual students as well. We're talking about our students, I'm talking about the Israeli students, who is highly trained, is a good researcher, but lack the kind of, wide global education. And the question is always whether we are as universities, whether our mandate is to teach, to train, to make them the best academicians, but also maybe to educate them. And since this might be the last station in the education system that they could use some education as well. And talking about education and talking about involvement in communities, in low social indigenous communities, giving the students the opportunity, first of all, to be exposed to a different kind of community that many of them were not exposed throughout their lives. Being able to give them the opportunity to give to others, to see how they can impact the community, and then realize how much they get out of it. So when we talk about those general programs that we want in order to enrich our students in general studies, and we are doing it nowadays in Israel, I think we should think about this role of educating the community or being involved with the community education as an educational service that we give to our own students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is, in fact, our host. Being president, Professor Menahem ben Sasson is the 13th president of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Before assuming the role of president in 2009, in fact, Professor ben Sasson served as a member of the Knesset and was a chairman of its Constitution, Law and Justice Committee. He served previously as the rector of the Hebrew University and the deputy dean of the Faculty of Humanities. He's a historian of the heritage of the Jews of Islam. He has written some 50 books and scholarly articles on a range of subjects, including Jewish communities and Muslim lands, the relationship between religion and economics. He also specializes in the study of Maimonides, social intellectual history, Geonic responsa and text, and Saadia Gaon's work in leadership. Professor Ben Sasson, thank you.
I'm not going to run away from the mission of the Hebrew University or other missions, social missions, of what people like to call the ivory tower. However, in order to be a little bit different, and in order to go back in history, not only forward, and to talk about challenges from another point of view, I'd like to remind of us the beginning of the modern university going to from Humboldt idea. You combine both research and teaching. If you want us to do both, you have to consider what are you investing in order to do both. One does the knowledge, and the other shares with the knowledge. Sharing with the knowledge is coming to communities, being responsible, as we talked about 40 kilometers north of Beersheba. Think of Jerusalem without the larger salary payer in this city. So you have around 30,000 households get their salary from this university, bigger than the government, bigger than the municipality, bigger than any other institute. You do not have a Jerusalem. You know, you do not have sober Jerusalem. If you want to have it not as the capital of this city, but irrelevant to modern life of a normal state, forget about research, invest in teaching. In teaching, you open your gates to broad population, and that was the tension between the president of this university and the greatest mind of his time, Einstein and Magnus. Magnus could have been fired, almost fired, because he wanted to open the gates, to have it broader, to have more opportunities, while Einstein said, look, it is a research institute. Now you are committed to research, nothing else. So let's imagine that we go back to this idea, just for maybe 5 or 10 minutes that I'm giving. And let's go back to the core of what we have to do. Yes, because in Israel we are not missing nowadays institutes of higher education. You want to learn MOOC, you can learn MOOC. So you are part of, how many do we have in the brain course from Tehran to Morocco, including Israel? I think that the last score is 90,000 students. In MOOC, Professor of us. He likes to serve it, he serves it, which is nice. But do they really have to read the last word, the most updated versions of research whenever they get into the MOOC and study the brain course in Coursera? I'm not sure. So if it is important to be broad, to be at service, as Rivka has just mentioned, to be the pioneer of the period by serving both A, the research, B, the population, G, geography, C, the region, E, the industry, somebody has to pay for. Rivka said it in a very nice way. But if you want to go to what you know and nobody else knows, to go back to neonatology and to have the best research in genetics with these embryos, and you need Rivka for this research, so she's not going to be the president. And if you want to know the last findings from the manuscripts on Maimonides in the 12th century that nobody knows, come to me. Or not to me, to Sarah Strunza. That's what we were educated for. I'm not saying that nobody else can do it. Everybody can do it. Maybe more talented than myself. It's hard to find more talented than Rivka. However, when it comes, I'm serious. When it comes to the heart of the matter, you want it from Humboldt, you know that it is one way to do it. But there are other ways. Nowadays, you have the CNRS, Research Center. You have some small, nice, compact research institutes that some of them create the know-how, the findings, the results, basic science. Go to Max Planck. you'll have the tension between university and Max Planck. But when you say that you are Max Planck professor, everybody bows down because you are the one who makes the research, serious one. And then you go to China. As it mentioned, we organized our mission around 8 months ago to China, and all of a sudden, another member to the mission came, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, which is okay. I think that whenever you come to the commitment to what we have been educated to things that we can do and colleges cannot do. In Israel, we have 69 colleges. We know how to make knowledge, and we do not necessarily have to serve in other fields. So let's pack the packages of the big tents, the huge palaces, and give this beautiful site, Scopus, back to the government, and go to the labs and to the libraries and to research institutes and create what we know to create. And do not forget, without basic science, you are not going to have the chips. You are not going to have the next computers. You are not going to have the governance system. You are not going to have the psychology. You are not going to have the medicines for the brain. You'll teach few, but you'll create a lot. And in this tension, when it comes to it, somebody has to understand the heart of the matter. We are for research. You know, you come from Canada, those of you are honest enough. You come from Canada, excuse me for saying it, to recruit not only our best professors, it used to be our best professors. You come to recruit our best master degree students, PhD students. Why? Because you realize what Rivka said before. They are the best in mind, not because they have something in the genes. They are mature. They face problems and nobody else knows. They know to ask the questions. And excuse me for another emphasis. And the other emphasis is that these people come from a minority, be it a Palestinian or a Jewish. Being a minority means to justify. Being a minority means to fight. Being a minority means to face clever jazz through knowledge and education. That's the only way we know it. So we learn by questioning and fight by challenging. In this case, the uniqueness, the opportunity, according to the titles that Nachman assigned us, what are the challenges of higher education? I'm not worried. So we won't have the budget, and we won't recruit all thousands of students, but we recruit the best of professors. It's not my invention. China now understood what's the meaning of brain drain, and they're about brain gain. The game is the same as here. They do not pay high salaries, not like MIT, not like Harvard, not like any private university. But the cutting-edge equipments, the best of labs, $8 million, one piece of equipment in a lab. You would have dreamt having it. You do not have any of these pieces in the Middle East. I saw 2 of them last week. That's a secret, because they knew that they will invest in community colleges, in secondary grade colleges, but in this case they invest not in equipment, but in minds, in between our ears. That's the tool, that's the secret, that's the future. It begins with the individual, then it comes to research groups, and then it could be translated to thousands and millions of millions. So maybe time came, Rivka, between ourselves, that we go back to the government, to Nadine's spouse in this case, and telling him, Mano, dear government, we know how to do these things. You want to have 69 colleges equal to spread thin the budget of, you laugh at us, the budget of 7.2 billion shekels, so divide it in the dollars. Now the dollars in Canada and the United States are the same. That's the whole education system, and he has to fight with it. He could be the best of jugglers. But tomorrow morning, whenever you want to create the best research, the fighting will be of losers, not of winners. of what we were used to do, and even humanities cannot do it nowadays. You need strong, powerful computer. You need the fellowships. You need, I'm modest. Be a full-time student at the university, and 100,000 shekels a year in order to be capable of bringing up your kids, because you're already 24 years old, and at the same time being free for your research. That's maybe the way. Go back, pack, or unfold what we were used to do. So in this case, when you talk about the challenges, we can do the MOOC. We can share with the responsibilities. We can be serving of the ultra-Orthodox that want to come and learn profession. We can serve the minorities in Israel because we know how to do research and we know how to teach. But if it comes to the future of research, and in this case, the strategic future of this small country, it will come and will be based solely on serious research. What does the government do? Most of us know it's not a hidden secret. They'll say, I review half of it. And again, I'm not joking. For nuclear development, the state of Israel hasn't got any limits. You can get whatever money you want. So what do? We go together to the nuclear plants. She has one next to her, we have one next to us, and we do the combined research. Why? Because somebody made a priority due to maybe existential priorities of the state of Israel, while we represent the essential needs of the state of Israel. So in this case, let's go back to what I said before. We go back to research. Put it as a priority. Invest in your faculty, both in salaries and at the same time in equipments. So whenever it comes to it, we may not be playing the game of count whatever you want, ears or heads or legs. It's the same. Either you divide it by 2 or you just have it as the numbers. But let's have these ones. And by serving as a research university, Ben-Gurion, ourselves, and then finding the unique power of each of us, I think we can serve better and meet the challenges better than just running ahead in a thin way after money that runs out of our hands because of some unseen social economic justice. That's one answer. An option. Am I strong enough to do it? Not necessarily. Can I stop paying salaries? Rivka told you about unions. Could I stop paying the pension? I'm not sure, but at least it gives me a right idea about priorities of a university. Start with research. Go then to the others. Forget about the Vorspeise. Go to the main course and then serve your body for future years to live. Thank you.
Hi. We have about 10-15 minutes open up for discussion and questions. I saw that Professor Stein was writing lots of things down, so she probably already...
letters of firing.
So, okay, so let's take some questions. Yes.
Well, universities and institutions of higher education have many, many tests, and we heard about it. And I appreciate the problems, the economic problems. But I want to say to President Carmi, Rivka, I would say, and I agree, universities have to contribute to growth, economic growth, and make a contribution to the state. But because of the situation and the constraints and so on, it is even more important than it was before to have our priorities right. And here I fully agree with my president that unless we have our priorities right, we may end up becoming an agent of the state. And our priorities are, first of all, to research, and I agree with the end of your saying, and to our students. It's not possible to put these things, one thing is to say to the government, whatever you say, but as an institution, and because of the dangers, and because of the pressures, we cannot adopt this neo-economic jargon in our internal discussion, and I cannot emphasize it more strongly. It is not an economic institution. I know the constraints, believe me, I know, and you know that I know. But this language of serving the state and doing all the things and having all those programs that are just money generating is at the end going to undercut our duties. And our duties are research and to tell our students straight to the face, look, we are here to educate you. You cannot change the right that you have for education for a right to a degree. This is what's happening in this country. The right for intellectual discourse, for being a part of society, becoming a good citizen, has been replaced by a right to a degree. That's why we have so many institutions. And there are no shortcuts. If we want Nobel Prizes, at the bottom of the pyramid, we need people who do research in philosophy and Jewish history and intellectual thing, all those people who are not practical at all. Introducing practicality in our jargon should be second, third, fourth choice. The first one, let's have those impractical guys who contribute to us practical people more than I can say.
Okay, so excuse me. So this was not so much a question, rather a challenge a little bit to what Professor Carmi had been saying, the priority should be research and research only. Professor Carmi, would you like to respond to this?
Can you take the podium with you also?
Well, Professor Galno, I couldn't agree with you more. First of all, I said explicitly, this is an additional strategy, okay? And I'm relating it as a strategy because I'm trying to be very practical. And you know, at least as good as I know. You can preach to this kind of approach, from now to eternity, and you should do it everywhere and always. But at the end of the day, you have to make this huge engine move, and by saying those very right things, unfortunately you cannot. This is a problem, this is a huge problem. Just before coming to this event, I sat with a representative of Yad Nadiv, with Asher Regan, and they are doing wonderful things for the humanities in the state of Israel. They are undertaking the role of the government big time to rescue humanities in Israel. And we were talking about how to go for it in a way that we can ensure sustainability and viability of humanities. Because if we are going to solve a problem of, for the next 3, 4, 5 years, we haven't done anything. We need to think, and then, the idea came all of a sudden, we need to show what is the relevant, it is wonderful. We need to study, we need to have humanities as such and for its very original goal. But if we show how humanities are relevant to so many other areas in academia, how they can team up with things that, how they can show what is the competitive edge that they can give to other areas in academia merely by teaming up with them. This will strengthen them a great deal, and they are going to actually base their program nowadays on this kind of collaboration between humanities and other. We need to find ways to survive. And then we have to find ways to really resume our capacity to become Nobel laureates in the next 20 years, 30 years, because next 20 years, unfortunately, I don't think we'll have one, because, we're talking about the ones that started the research 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they are not good candidates for that. So hopefully, with what we are doing right now, we'll have our laureate Nobel in about 30 years from now. But we need to be very pragmatic, and this is how we survived in the States of Israel, by the way. I don't have to tell you. I mean, we have to invent all those ways of how to really go about things to make sure that we stay there and we are very strong and we are very fruitful. But again, you know, basic research is the name of the game. This is our role. This is our mandate. All the others is just, you know, ways to make sure that we can do this basic research.
Professor Stein here wants to have a different response.
Just to end quickly on this, it's very interesting, Rivka, the comments you make, because we're going through really what many of us in Canada consider a change which is alarming for the future of basic research in the way that Menahem really talked about. Concretely, our research councils are being reformed to focus on results for society, right, and on relevance, and even in science. So NSERC, which is our basic funding, Basic Research Council to fund scientific research, is now all about collaboration with industry and results. And the reaction is very much yours, Menahem, that if we move away from the fundamental research mandate of the university and from basic research, the nature of the institution as we know it, we will destroy it. But where you went, Menahem, you said, okay, go back to the tent. If they don't get it, right, in public, if they really don't get it, because this is where governments are going. And that's why this is complex. Governments are what we call now the social investment state. They're investors. They don't use language that they used 25 years ago or 30 years for public good. They're investing states. And when they're investing states, you know what they want? Results. And they want to see the results, and they want to count the results, and they want to measure the results. And to the extent that great research universities are dependent on government funding, are we really serious that we go back to the tents and we do the research without them? Because they don't think like us. They think less and less like us all the time.
My answer is yes. I'll say in short, and I think that we have to try it. And we have to take a case study in our universities to be brave enough. It's not endangering the whole university. Fields of, I'll give it from my field. Let's assume that we don't stop teaching Jewish history. Okay. It's not a mandatory chapter. We do the research. Research, we know how to find the money. In no time, I'll find my students as they are nowadays in Harvard or in UC, or maybe in UFT, and they're happy. China won't take them because they're not interested in this kind of history. So somebody, if not today, will find out that a national mission is not to have another college, but maybe to have another 4 scholars of Jewish history that know how to read Arabic in the resources. Otherwise, we are not having it, so somebody else will have it. It'll take time. We'll pay some dues, but maybe we'll make a repentance. Sometime you have to do it in order to educate your people. If we take our flags back, if we change our slogan according to the smile or the needs of each person in each position, we are doomed maybe to disappear as a research institute.
I just want to introduce a very new and elegant term. It says youth-inspired basic research. How about that? Nice, huh?
Yes, over there.
Yes, hello. Johan Benny-Bou from Laurentian University. For those who are familiar with Canada, you'll know us that we're a big research university, but there are nonetheless many people doing research at Laurentian University. My question is for Professor Stein and also for Professor Sasson. First of all, thank you for your enlightening talks. Very interesting. Dr. Stein, I thought you really nailed the hammer on the head on many questions regarding where we're going in education, with regards to new technologies and so on. However, I would like to take issue with the question of dividing research institution versus teaching institution. I'm sure you saw it coming from somewhere in the room.
Sure.
I'd like to wonder aloud if we're not combining two different questions here. First of all, separating research faculty from teaching faculty, which is one possibility and one issue, which is already controversial in itself. And the question of dividing research institutions from teaching institutions. Both are controversial, but one need not necessarily accompany the other. Dr. Ben-Gurion did talk about it a bit with regards to sciences. I think it's very justifiable in sciences because of the massive investments that need to be done. However, I'm not convinced that in humanities it really does need to happen. I'm not sure that having the same number of research-oriented faculty across the country gives less results than concentrating them. So my first question is that how, can we really?
So let's start on this question.
The second one is very related, actually. Just if I
Then make it a question.
Yes. Well,
Quickly, yeah.
The first question is that, can we really get more results? And I'd like to hear more arguments in favor. And the second is, are there not some costs to it too? We know that back in the 1950s, when there were only a few universities in Canada, many aspects of Canadian life were ignored by the simple fact that all scholars were in Toronto and Montreal and so on. A new concentration of scholars, of research concentration, will that not have some cost?
Okay, so first question is about the split between research and teaching.
Right.
Second, about regional.
Actually, let me answer both questions together, all right? And let me be frank, rather than politically correct. In Canada, we have what I call, and I think to some degree true in Israel too, what we have is what I call the peanut butter strategy of higher education. Spread it all around, right? Spread it all around because funding of higher education is a political process. And so you invest across the country in different institutions of differing quality. You avoid all the political dilemmas. And you end up with no commitment to the great research universities, frankly. In Canada, we've never really been willing to differentiate seriously and to invest seriously in our best research institutions. I think Israel struggles to some degree with that too. That's not true in Germany, where they have a serious process of differentiation. That's not true in the United Kingdom. And we all know about the processes in the United Kingdom, and they're very flawed, and we know some of the perversities, but nevertheless, they're real. In China, there is a serious investment in the very best research institutions, and it's partly because of what I think Menahem argued, that in a period where the costs of higher education are mounting for governments, unless you have the commitment to invest seriously in research, you will not, as a society, maintain premier research institutions in a globally competitive environment. And I think that's something that we have to address. Now, my friend Noreen from St. John's and all my other friends around this room are going to get up and slit my throat at the end of this conversation. But you have to protect me here. But this is a real choice. This is a real choice. And we have to understand the global context in which this conversation is taking place. We're an outlier that we don't do it. We're one of the few countries in the developed world that don't do it. And you pay a very high price for it in terms of doing the basic research that Menahem talked about. You have to ask yourself, this is a world, frankly, of trade-offs. So you don't do that. Then you're involved in public-private partnerships where you're looking for research money for your very best scholars, and there are other costs attached. And we won't have that conversation because it's too difficult politically.
I have to apologize for Rivka and myself. In this case, I am a good host, I think. It's quite rare, Rivka, if I can say that we ever participate on a panel. Mm-hmm. It's rare that both of us are on the same panel, and in 45 minutes we are going to be out of this city around 60 kilometers to the south and 75 kilometers to half of the north. So I think that we can stay with questions. You have the luxury of getting it. It was prepared maybe by the organizer, skillfully prepared by the organizer of the conference. You got variety of challenges with full context. you got doubts of a responsible president, and then you got answers, may say even rhetoric answers, for maybe less responsible president. In this case, in between, those of you who are professors continue wherever they feel like, but those of you who are presidents of university know that it's not only the right and wrong answer, it's much more sophisticated when it comes to be responsible for regional issues, for households, and for thousands of students.
Thank you. Here.
Being rather elderly, I remember the events that brought the greatest boom to education, to research and learning and so on. This is a flippant comment, but it's true. When the Russians put Sputnik into space, we had the greatest boom in university building, research and so on. And in all fields, including Jewish studies, were a beneficiary of the Russians putting Sputnik into space. So let's hope that the Chinese learn to colonize the moon and fire rockets at Earth. We'll have another boom in research.
Thank you very much, and we should now join for lunch. Thank you.